Hi everyone. Hello, hello. I hope that you guys can hear me and that you can see me. Well, I don't think you can see me just yet, but I hope you can hear me. And so now I'm hoping that you can see me today. So if you were here at 4 p.m., you've seen me already, but we had some technical issues, so I'm having to re-record the lesson. If you are just hopping on, I welcome you here today to our lesson about meningitis, and I hope that you feel free to leave a comment and leave a question. And if you were here this morning or earlier, if you were here earlier this afternoon, I hope that you come back and that you leave your comments, and maybe you'll find some of your questions were answered in this redo, because again, we were live this morning, but we had some issues, so we're having to record it, but here we are. Let me check really quickly to see if I am indeed live on Facebook really fast, and then we will start our lesson. Okay, I think I'm seeing myself. Okay, so I think we're good. Okay, so today we are talking about the disease of meningitis, and this is an audience request. And so let me set myself up to start. So here on this channel, what we do is we talk about the subject of short microbiology. We do it in short chats. I'm hoping that you can see my screen. Maybe, are you able to see my screen? Let us double check. I'm hoping that you can see the screen. Yes, I think you can. Okay. So here we do chats in, so typically we started this channel by doing chats in Kikuyu, because I was really interested in learning how to speak the Kikuyu language. But since then, we've gotten a lot of interest in talks in English and talks in Kiswahili. And so that is why we are now bringing to you guys these lessons in both English and Kiswahili in addition to Kikuyu. So our structure is that we will have English every Saturday, and I will host those. And then my team members usually are in the chat, or my team colleagues rather, they're usually in the chat. And then on Tuesday, tutakuwa na Kiswahili, and then on Thursday, tutakuwa na Kikuyu. So that's the way our lessons are structured. And just so you are aware, so this month or this upcoming month, we have, so today we are talking about meningitis. Then next Saturday, we'll be talking again about cells and microbes, because I've gotten a few questions that tell me that we need to make sure that we are kind of all on the same page with that. And then in November 9th, we'll talk about blood groups. And then in November 16th, we'll talk about ulcers. And then on November 23rd, we'll talk a little bit about alcohol. I'm not really here to say that, like, whether people should drink or not. What I'm interested in is a discussion on how alcohol affects our cells and the microbes that live in our gut. And then at the end of the month, we'll wrap up with a conversation about GMOs. Again, I'm not here to tell you whether they are good or bad. I just want to talk about what they are. And so that's going to be a lesson structure for the next month. So again, on Saturday, I do the lesson in English, and then my team members, my colleagues, team members, co-team members are usually in the chat. And then on Tuesday and Thursday, my colleagues will be in front, and then I will be in the chat. And so for today's lesson, let's jump in. So I have 5 things that I'd like to touch base with about this disease and make sure that so our lesson is structured into 5 things basically. So thing number 1 is to answer the question, what is it? What is meningitis? So again, this is to answer a question that came from a comment member. And so meningitis is a disease, an infection of the meninges. So the meninges are the cover of the brain, basically. So anatomists, when they look at this, they divide it into this section called the dura mater, which is the outer layer that's closest to the skull, then the arachnoid mater, which is the middle layer, and the pia mater, which is the inner layer. So these 3 components together are what make the meninges. And so in the disease of meningitis, this means that this is the infection of the meninges. And so what happens in infection is that there is an inflammation. And inflammation is what? Inflammation is a scenario where the body responds to an infection. And so this can mean anything from like a fever to try and kill off whatever the infectious agent might be, to increased blood flow to try and like push whatever the invader is, all the way to like an increased presence of immune system cells that fight the infection. And then also there can be So we've talked about fever, blood flow, swelling. Sometimes you see swelling in infection. So those are some of the things that show, those are some of the symptoms that show up in an inflammatory situation. And so meningitis basically is the swelling of the outer membrane of the cell of the outer membrane of the brain and then the spinal cord. And so when there's this inflammation, that is the disease state. The reason, so then question number 2 or point number 2 that I want you to kind of focus on is this idea that the reason why we are interested in meningitis disease is there are 1 in 10 people die from meningitis, and this meningitis is caused by a bacterial, fungal, or viral infection. 1 in 5 meningitis survivors live with lifelong disability. Because one thing that I'd like to also stress about this idea of like infection is that we can all get infected with all sorts of things, but then our bodies adjust and respond to those infections differently. So in some people, they respond quickly and then the infection is cleared. In other people, the infection will be cleared, but then the body still has to deal with the ramifications of that whole process. So the body itself takes a hit. And so 1 in 5 people can have these like lifelong illness after the infection. And then according to this resource, the Confederation of like meningitis researchers, they say meningitis affects more than 2.5 million people globally every year. And then World Meningitis Day is the 5th of October. So we just missed it on this platform, but maybe we will catch it next year on this platform and we can talk about this topic again in honor of that. We can talk about this topic on that day next time or next year. Okay, so point number 3, what is it caused by? So typically, meningitis disease is caused by a bacteria called Neisseria meningitidis. This is like the most prominent cause of this disease. However, there are other bacteria that can cause this disease as well. So these include Streptococcus pneumonia, Haemophilus influenzae, Streptococcus agalacticae, and then all these other types of bacteria that are also listed there, like Mycobacterium tuberculosis, Salmonella, etc. And so the thing with these diseases, or the thing with this infection, is that it's also caused by viruses and fungi and parasites. And then it's not only that, but sometimes like an injury to the brain or to the spine can also manifest in this inflammation and in this disease. There are also certain cancers that can lead to this disease. And then there are also like some drugs and some medicines that we can take that can lead to this illness as well. And so, long story short, there are many different causes of meningitis, but the outcome is usually an inflammation, a swelling of the brain covering, and then the spine. And in the earlier lesson, somebody asked me about aseptic meningitis. And so aseptic meningitis is a situation where your cerebrospinal fluid, so this is the fluid that is in your spine, where it tests negative for bacteria. So in our earlier conversation, I interpreted the word aseptic to mean without a microbe, without any microbes present. But actually, when used to discuss meningitis, this means that the cerebrospinal fluid doesn't have any bacteria, and so then this tells the doctor that, number one, either this can be caused by a virus or maybe a bacteria that's hard to measure, perhaps. But typically, this aseptic meningitis is caused by a virus. But as we mentioned earlier, it can be caused, generally, meningitis can be caused by viruses and fungi and all of these other sources. So to the person that asked specifically about aseptic meningitis, this is your answer. And then also, I think the person from earlier asked me about whether herpes can cause meningitis. I said I would look that up, so I will look that up and respond in the comments. But in regard to what is aseptic meningitis, typically it's a scenario where the cerebrospinal fluid has tested negative for bacteria. And also, I remember from earlier this afternoon, somebody asked whether like what it means to have like cerebrospinal fluid that is like has a complication. So I want to remind you that all of the tissues in our body, they typically exist in a very specific ecosystem. And so what that means is that there's like the tissues that make the organ, and then those tissue are made up of cells, and then all of that lives in a very specific environment. And in the context of the spine, that means that there's also the spinal fluid that's there. Okay. So now point number 4, how is this disease transmitted? So it is transmitted through respiratory secretions. So this is mucus, sneezing, those type of things. Basically anywhere where the secretions that come from your nose can transfer from you to someone else. And then in terms of where this disease occurs most frequently, there are certain parts of the world where this disease shows up. In our case, on our continent, typically there's this belt called the meningitis belt, and it's shown here in dark blue on your screen. And then the sections in light blue are places where there's like an increased risk. And typically, the way many people try to prevent this disease is typically by getting a vaccine. So remember, the purpose of vaccines is as a preventative measure to minimize the risk of severe disease. And so to minimize the risk of severe meningitis, the best place to start is the meningitis vaccine. All right, and so then point number 5 has to do with symptoms. What are the symptoms of meningitis disease? And so some of those symptoms include and so in this chart, this shows you the difference between symptoms that are present in bacterial and viral meningitis. So these symptoms include fever, chills, headaches, neck stiffness, nausea and vomiting, sensitivity to light, and those sorts of symptoms. And then as we mentioned, the causes include bacterial causes, so like S. pneumonia, group B strep, and the N meningitis, those types of agents. And then also there are different viruses. So actually, to answer the person's question about whether herpes viruses cause meningitis, this chart suggests that yes. So there are all sorts of viruses that can cause the infection that leads to the inflammation that leads to now this disease state. As far as treatment, bacterial meningitis is treated with antibiotics. If you remember, there's a video on the channel that distinguishes between bacteria and viruses. So if you would like to go learn more about the difference between bacteria and viruses, there's a video on the channel. But for this point, I would like to say that in the case of bacterial meningitis, this disease can be treated with antibiotics usually. However, in the case of viral meningitis, that is not the case. And then with regard to the risk of complications, typically with bacterial meningitis, there is this risk for complication, but it seems to diminish a little bit in the case of viral meningitis. So I hope that with these 5 things that you learned one interesting thing about the meningitis disease and the agents that cause it, and the symptoms that cause it, and the preventative measures that can minimize your getting sick maybe. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to write them in the comment section. I will do my best to answer them. For the lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays, those lessons will be hosted by my colleagues, and they will be the ones in the front of the camera, but I will be in the comments. So in the same way, so we all work as a team. So usually the one who's in front of the camera is, obviously visible, but then there's people in the back end who are engaging and dialoguing. And so yeah, for Tuesday and Thursday, I will be in the comment section, and I will be able to answer any questions or clarification that you might want. The structure will be exactly the same, except it will be in Kiswahili and in Kikuyu. All right, thank you so much for being here. It is really my privilege to interact with you today and to answer your questions and to answer this particular audience question. Okay, I will see you on Tuesday. Bye.